Have you ever noticed how desperation leaks out of a man before he even speaks? A look in his eyes, the way he clings too tightly, the way he cannot stand silence, it gives him away, and once it does, his power is already gone. History is filled with men who had everything to offer, yet were ruined because they revealed their hunger too soon. They thought passion proved strength, but it exposed weakness. They thought honesty earned loyalty, but it marked them as prey. Machiavelli warned that nothing is more dangerous than the stench of need. It turns kings into beggars and lovers into fools. The world does not fear the desperate. It manages them, uses them, discards them. But the man who learns detachment becomes unreadable, untouchable, feared. This is the line between being controlled and becoming the one who controls. Detachment was once the supreme shield of power, the quiet fortress that kept a man untouchable, unreadable, and therefore feared. But in our age it is vanishing. In its place rises desperation, a stench so strong it announces weakness before a single word is spoken. Once rulers and men alike learned to mask their hunger, to conceal their desire, to remain unmoved until the moment to strike. Today men expose themselves shamelessly, begging for validation, clutching for scraps of attention, and in doing so, they rot their strength before the contest even begins. Nothing is more fatal than a man who reveals that he cannot bear silence, who cannot survive without a nod of approval. Desperation is not hidden, it radiates, and when it does, his enemies smile, for his downfall has already begun. The danger of losing detachment is not abstract. It is immediate and merciless. Desperation makes a man predictable. Every move he makes is not a choice but a compulsion. When he desires too strongly, others need only deny him, and he becomes their puppet. His impulses become chains, and those who can withhold what he craves hold his leash. A desperate man is never feared. He is managed, toyed with, and ultimately discarded. He may believe his passion proves commitment, but in truth, it proves servitude. The world does not reward fire without discipline. It rewards the one who can hold ice in his veins while others burn with need. The moment detachment is lost, sovereignty is lost, for he has given the keys of his power to those who can manipulate his desperation. You see it in the lover who chases until he disgusts. At first his affection flatters, but as he clings, as he demands, as he exposes that he cannot endure distance, he poisons the very love he seeks. What once seemed devotion now reeks of suffocation. She sees not a strong man, but a desperate one, and instinctively recoils. You see it in the worker who begs for approval, who fawns at every command, who sacrifices dignity for a pat on the head. At first he may be tolerated. Soon he is despised, for no man respects one who kneels without being asked. You see it in rulers who cling to their throne long after their time has passed, their hands trembling, their voices pleading. Their very grip on power hastens its escape, for subjects sense the fear, the panic, and they know the sovereign no longer rules, he begs. Society devours those who cannot hold their emotions at bay. It is merciless toward the man who reveals too much, who bleeds in public, who announces his hunger instead of concealing it. Men imagine the world is kind, that sincerity wins loyalty, that open desire breeds connection. This is a fatal illusion. People are drawn not to need, but to strength. They may comfort the desperate, but they do not follow him. They may pity him, but they do not serve him. The moment detachment disappears, so does influence. For the masses instinctively sense that he cannot command himself, so how could he ever command them? The Machiavellian truth is brutal. The man who cannot detach himself is already enslaved to those who can. Desperation is the clearest signal of weakness in the human game. It is the flare in the night sky, announcing to all, here is the one who can be broken. A calm adversary will watch, wait, and strike when his target's desperation drives him into mistakes. A woman will test, withhold, and confirm her suspicions that the man before her is ruled by longing, not by strength. An employer will squeeze more labor, sensing the worker's desperation to stay useful. Power flows not to the loudest beggar, but to the one who remains silent, composed, patient, untouchable. The moment desperation leaks through, his fate is sealed, not by accident, but by natural law. Consider how swiftly desperation corrodes perception. The ambitious man who pushes too hard is called overeager. The leader who fears being forgotten becomes mocked. The friend who clings too tightly becomes a burden. All their intentions might have been noble, Yet the scent of desperation transforms nobility into weakness. What is admired in moderation is despised in excess. And what drives this excess? A failure to detach, to accept delay, to endure silence. The desperate man cannot bear absence. He must fill every void with noise, every pause with pursuit. In this inability to wait lies his ruin. He exhausts those around him, he exposes his lack of control, and he invites contempt where he once sought respect. Do not mistake this for a minor flaw. Desperation is the prelude to destruction. History records rulers who revealed their hunger and were swiftly undone. It records lovers whose passion turned into obsession and left them humiliated. It records soldiers who broke formation out of fear and doomed their comrades. What ties all these fates together is not lack of talent or lack of opportunity, it is lack of detachment. They could not hold their desires in check long enough to let opportunity ripen. They could not wear the mask of calm while chaos burned around them. They revealed themselves too soon, and once revealed, they were destroyed. And yet, what is most terrifying is not merely the fall of the desperate man, but the hidden costs of his desperation. For every plea, every chase, every trembling grasp leaves scars deeper than he imagines. The trap of over-attachment does not end when he fails. It lingers, reshaping how others see him forever. A single display of desperation can stain a reputation beyond repair, marking him as weak in every future contest. The ruler who begs is remembered not for his victories but for his pleading. The lover who clings is remembered not for his affection but for his neediness. The worker who grovels is remembered not for his diligence but for his lack of spine. And this is only the beginning, for in the next step lies something darker, the hidden traps that ensnare every man who cannot master detachment. Traps so subtle they destroy him without his even realizing it. The hidden costs of desperation are never paid at once. They accumulate silently, like poison dripping into a cup. At first, the desperate man believes he is still in control. He tells himself his hunger is merely passion, his pleading merely persistence, his trembling merely devotion. But the world is not fooled. Every gesture betrays him. Each word laced with need, each glance that begs instead of commands, announces his slavery. He may cling to the illusion of strength, but those around him smell the weakness before he admits it to himself. They know where to strike, how to delay, when to deny him, because desperation makes his every move visible, written in advance by his lack of discipline. The first hidden cost is credibility. Once a man is seen as desperate, his words carry no weight. Promises he makes are ignored, threats he utters are laughed at, commitments he offers are treated as noise. Even if he speaks truth, it is dismissed, for desperation corrodes authority. The man who cannot restrain himself is assumed incapable of restraint in judgment. His reputation becomes fragile, his voice diminished, his influence erased. Machiavelli knew that perception is as powerful as reality, and once desperation marks a man, he is no longer perceived as sovereign, but as supplicant. The courtier who flatters too much, the ally who pleads for favor, the general who fears to wait, each loses credibility not by failure of skill, but by failure of composure. The second cost is exploitation. Once men detect desperation, they do not merely lose respect for it, they use it. The desperate worker is asked to do more for less, because his need binds him tighter than any contract. The desperate lover is tested with cruelty, because his clinging reveals he will not leave. The desperate ruler is surrounded by false allies, each whispering loyalty while sharpening knives, because they know his hunger for power blinds him to betrayal. Detachment is a shield against manipulation. Desperation is a signal inviting it. And the tragedy is this: the desperate man often believes he is winning while he is being drained. He mistakes exploitation for acceptance, manipulation for alliance, pity for respect. By the time he realizes he has been used, he has already been emptied. The third cost is decay of the self. Desperation does not remain an outward posture, it seeps inward until the man begins to despise himself. He knows he has revealed too much. He feels the sting of humiliation. He senses the disgust in others' eyes, and yet he cannot stop. His impulses rule him. The lover who chases despite rejection hates himself as much as the one who rejects him. The worker who grovels for approval feels his dignity rot even as he kneels. The ruler who clings to power in trembling fear sees in the mirror not a sovereign, but a slave of his own throne. Nothing corrodes the soul faster than knowing one has traded strength for survival. Detachment, once lost, is not easily regained, for self-contempt gnaws at the foundation of resolve. The traps of over-attachment are everywhere, and they are designed to ensnare those who reveal themselves too soon. The trap of over-attachment in love leads a man to believe affection must be proved by endless pursuit, when in truth, the highest proof of strength is the ability to walk away. The trap of over-attachment in work convinces him that loyalty will be rewarded, when in truth, loyalty without power is exploited, not honored. The trap of over-attachment in politics persuades rulers to cling tightly to allies, when in truth, alliances are strengthened by distance and weakened by suffocation. These traps are not accidents, they are tests. Society rewards the man who passes by withholding, resisting, concealing. It punishes the man who fails by consuming him whole. Consider the case of Savonarola, the fiery preacher of Florence, whose passion knew no restraint. He believed his words alone could bend the city to his will, that his devotion proved his divine strength. But his desperation for influence was his ruin. He revealed his hunger too openly, exposed his fire too nakedly, until his enemies saw exactly where to strike. He was consumed by the very flames he could not master, and his name remains as a warning. Passion without detachment leads to destruction. Contrast this with Cesare Borgia, who waited, who concealed, who struck with timing rather than with impulse. He detached himself from appearances, from emotion, from need, and by doing so, he commanded not only his enemies but his allies. One was burned alive for revealing too much, the other immortalized for concealing until the moment was his. The lesson is brutal but clear. The world belongs not to those who desire most fiercely, but to those who can hold desire in chains. Yet few men today can manage such restraint. They display their hunger in every gesture, every word, every digital echo of their lives. Their desperation is recorded, amplified, and consumed by the crowd. They live in cages built from their own impulses, while the detached man walks freely, unseen, unreadable, feared for his silence. And if the costs of desperation are this severe, loss of credibility, exploitation, decay of the self, what then lies deeper? What happens when desperation is not only personal but cultural? When entire societies abandon detachment and embrace hunger? What ruins await when desperation becomes the norm, the air men breathe, the law they follow? When desperation becomes the norm, the world itself shifts into a theater of weakness. Entire societies begin to smell of hunger, and nothing is more dangerous than a crowd that cannot wait, cannot endure silence, cannot bear the discipline of restraint. Once, civilizations measured strength by patience. Armies waited for seasons to change before striking. Merchants hoarded wealth to wield power at the right moment. Rulers concealed their intentions behind layers of ceremony. But now, in a culture ruled by speed and craving, men expose themselves instantly. They broadcast their needs, their insecurities, their endless thirst for approval, and in doing so they create a world where desperation is not the exception but the rule. And when desperation is universal, power belongs entirely to the rare few who can resist it. This decay reveals itself in the smallest gestures and the grandest politics alike. The lover who posts his every longing for the world to see has already lost the mystery that makes him desirable. The worker who floods his superiors with desperate affirmations signals that he is disposable. The ruler who clings to public applause, refreshing the mirror of popularity, reveals his terror of irrelevance. Each of these men has forgotten that influence is not gained by exposure but by concealment. Detachment makes a man unpredictable, and unpredictability makes him dangerous. But a desperate man is transparent. His movements are seen before he acts. His enemies prepare before he attacks. His downfall is written before the battle begins. And so we return to Machiavelli's ancient warning: the man who cannot control appearances is already defeated by those who can. The cultural rise of desperation has turned strength itself into a rarity. Where once calm restraint was expected of rulers, now the masses reward emotional spectacle. Politicians scream, lovers beg, workers overshare, leaders grasp, each revealing their hunger more loudly than the last. And the audience itself, desperate for distraction, rewards this weakness with applause, while secretly despising those who display it. For in the human heart, respect never belongs to the desperate. The public may cheer a man's tears, but they will not fear him. They may nod at his confessions, but they will not obey him. The hidden truth is that society pretends to honor vulnerability, but it instinctively follows detachment. It may comfort the weak, but it bows only to the strong. This hypocrisy is deadly for those who believe appearances at face value. The worker believes his loyalty is admired, but his loyalty is filed away as proof he can be overworked. The lover believes his devotion is cherished, but his devotion is used as a mirror to inflate the pride of the one who withholds. The ruler believes his trembling hold on the throne is seen as dedication, but it is read as weakness that invites plots. Desperation does not only destroy, it deceives. It convinces the desperate man that he is noble, even while others sharpen their knives behind his back. And this is the true danger, that the desperate man does not realize he is trapped until the blade has already touched his throat. What happens when desperation scales beyond the individual? When entire classes of men reveal their hunger openly, when societies reward exposure over concealment, when restraint is mocked as coldness and detachment painted as cruelty. The result is a culture built not on discipline but on impulse, not on strategy but on reaction. Markets crash at the first hint of fear because investors cannot detach from panic. Alliances fracture because leaders cannot detach from vanity. Families collapse because men and women cannot detach from their cravings long enough to preserve stability. Everywhere you look, desperation gnaws at the foundation of order. A civilization of desperate men cannot last, for it offers itself willingly to the few predators who can remain detached. It is no accident that the rare men who rise above this chaos seem almost inhuman. Their silence unsettles, their patience feels unnatural, their refusal to expose need appears cruel. But in truth, they are simply practicing the oldest law of power. Never reveal your desperation. Their calm draws resources to them. Their restraint creates mystery. Their distance inspires respect. They do not need to beg because others beg them. They do not need to cling because others cling to them. They do not need to chase because the world chases what it cannot possess. The detached man does not only protect himself from ruin, he turns the desperation of others into his weapon, and this weapon grows sharper as the world grows hungrier. And yet, hidden within this cultural descent into desperation lies a deeper peril, one darker than the loss of respect or the exploitation of weakness. It is the erosion of sovereignty itself, the slow collapse of the individual into dependency. For once a man cannot detach, he cannot stand alone. He becomes bound to every approval, enslaved by every glance, governed by every denial. His identity no longer belongs to him, but to those who grant or withhold the scraps he craves. This erosion is not loud. It does not announce itself with fire. It creeps silently, until one day the man looks in the mirror and realizes he is not a man but a puppet. And this, more than any humiliation, is the ultimate ruin Machiavelli foresaw, the slow, invisible death of the self, through desperation that once seemed harmless. But if this is the fate of men who cannot detach, then the question becomes darker still. What are the hidden traps that ensure desperation tightens its grip, generation after generation? Why do men fall into the same snares century after century, despite seeing the ruin before them? The answer, as Machiavelli revealed, is that these traps are not accidents, they are designed. And to understand them is to uncover why so many are condemned to weakness before they even have the chance to rise. These traps that breed desperation are ancient, and they are woven into the very fabric of human interaction. They are not random errors but recurring snares, predictable patterns that ensnare the majority of men. The first trap is the illusion of safety and honesty. From childhood, men are told that sincerity is virtue, that expressing every desire, every fear, every longing is noble. But the moment a man reveals himself fully, he places a dagger in the hands of those around him. His honesty, far from protecting him, becomes a map to his vulnerabilities. The rival knows what he craves most. The lover knows what he fears losing. The ruler's enemies know the throne is his obsession. Transparency is praised in words but punished in practice, for society rewards masks and devours exposure. The desperate man cannot resist tearing off his mask, believing honesty will bind others to him. Instead, it gives them the coordinates of his destruction. The second trap is the myth of loyalty as permanence. Men believe that because they have served faithfully, others will serve them in return. They mistake temporary alignment for eternal alliance. But loyalty is never permanent, it is conditional, as fleeting as the winds of advantage. The desperate man clings to loyalty as though it were iron, blind to the truth that it is paper. He invests his heart, his labor, his soul into others, and when they inevitably turn, his desperation makes him incapable of detachment. He begs, he bargains, he throws away dignity in pursuit of permanence that never existed, and here lies the cruelty of the trap. Loyalty is useful only when coupled with power, and the desperate man who lacks detachment possesses neither. The third trap is the premature revelation of ambition. Nothing condemns a man faster than showing the world his hunger before he has the strength to claim it. The desperate man cannot wait. He speaks too soon, acts too quickly, exposes his designs before they are fortified. His enemies, alerted, unite to stop him before his rise is possible. The detached man conceals, waits, strengthens his position in silence until revelation is no longer dangerous. But desperation robs a man of patience. He craves recognition now, power now, affection now, and in declaring his hunger, he destroys the very possibility of satisfying it. Machiavelli observed that many rulers fall not because their ambitions were too grand, but because they revealed them too openly. Men forgive ambition only when it is already unassailable. Anything less is invitation to ruin. These traps feed one another until they form a cycle that tightens like a noose. The man who reveals himself honestly becomes vulnerable. His loyalty is betrayed, and in clinging to it, he exposes himself further. His premature ambition announces him as a target, and he finds himself cornered before his strength is mature. Each failure deepens his desperation, and each new act of desperation accelerates his collapse. It is no wonder that most men, once ensnared, never escape. Their downfall is not sudden. It is engineered by their inability to detach, by their eagerness to expose what should have been concealed. The traps are simple, but their simplicity is what makes them inescapable to the undisciplined. Consider the Florentine courtier who could not conceal his envy of rivals. He spoke too freely, revealing the alliances he feared and the favors he longed for. His honesty made him predictable, his loyalty misplaced, his ambition transparent. Within months, he was undone, not because his rivals were more capable, but because they were more silent. They withheld what he revealed. They listened as he confessed. They struck precisely where his desperation had guided them. This story is not unique. It repeats endlessly in every palace, every business, every household. The desperate man always writes the script of his own downfall, while the detached man only needs to follow it to victory. And yet, these traps are not confined to rulers and courtiers. They ensnare ordinary men in their daily lives. The worker who confesses every insecurity to his superior is passed over for the one who conceals. The friend who demands constant reassurance exhausts those around him until they withdraw. The lover who reveals his entire ambition for the relationship too soon frightens the very partner he sought to secure. What ruins rulers ruins common men alike, for the laws of desperation are universal. In every context, those who reveal too much are consumed by those who can endure silence. The cruelty of these traps lies in how natural they feel. Honesty feels virtuous. Loyalty feels safe. Ambition feels noble, and so men step willingly into their own cages, certain they are walking toward strength, unaware that they are marching toward dependence. This is why desperation is not only a weakness but a contagion, spreading because it disguises itself as virtue. Men applaud their own shackles, confuse their own slavery for proof of morality. Only later do they realize that what they called honesty was recklessness, what they called loyalty was blindness, what they called ambition was exposure. By then the knife is already in their back, placed there by their own hand. If these traps are so ancient, so visible, so ruinous, why do men continue to fall into them? Why does every generation repeat the cycle, as if no one has ever seen the corpses piled from the same mistakes? The answer, Machiavelli insisted, is that desperation is not simply weakness of will. It is engineered by forces more cunning than the desperate man can perceive. And to see how men are shaped into slaves before they even understand they are in chains is to uncover the most dangerous design of all. Desperation is not born only from the flaws of a man's character. It is cultivated. From the moment he begins to walk, he is trained to seek approval, to hunger for recognition, to expose his needs as proof of his worth. Parents condition him with rewards for obedience. Teachers praise his desperation to please. Employers exploit his willingness to beg for validation. By the time he reaches maturity, he has been molded into a creature incapable of silence. The very structure of society engineers desperation as its primary fuel. A man who cannot detach is easier to control, easier to manipulate, easier to discard. Thus, the culture of desperation is not accidental. It is a design, a mechanism that keeps the majority enslaved, while the rare detached few rise above the chaos. This engineering begins with the myth that attention equals value. From childhood, men are told that the one who shouts loudest, who seeks most eagerly, who displays his hunger most openly, will be rewarded. But what is rewarded is not power, it is compliance. The boy who craves approval becomes the man who craves recognition, and the man who craves recognition becomes the slave who dances for every glance. The desperate are pacified with crumbs of attention, while their strength is stripped away. Machiavelli would remind us, it is not the man who shows hunger that gains sovereignty, but the one who withholds his appetite until others are desperate to feed him. Yet the system thrives on reversing this truth, on convincing men that exposure is strength and restraint is weakness. The more they display, the weaker they become, and the weaker they become, the more dependent they are on those who withhold. The second layer of engineering lies in the promise of stability. Men are told that if they cling tightly enough to careers, to relationships, to authority, they will be secure. But this is a lie, for nothing is permanent except change. The desperate man, however, believes the lie because it flatters his fear. He clings to jobs that degrade him, to partners who despise him, to rulers who exploit him. He interprets endurance as stability, when in truth it is decay. And as he clings tighter, his desperation deepens, until he cannot imagine life without what he fears to lose. This is the perfect trap for those who wish to govern him, for a man who clings cannot rebel. His detachment is destroyed not by accident, but by conditioning, until his very survival seems to depend on chains he could have slipped at any time. The third and most subtle design is the worship of speed. Men are trained to believe that waiting is failure, that delay is weakness, that only the impulsive win. Every distraction, every flashing signal of modern life feeds this conditioning. The desperate man cannot endure silence without filling it, cannot withstand distance without chasing it, cannot allow his ambition to mature without announcing it prematurely. And so he is stripped of the one advantage that once defined rulers: patience. The detached man waits like a predator in tall grass, striking only when certain. The desperate man leaps at shadows, exhausting himself until he collapses. This design ensures that most men never accumulate strength. They burn themselves out in frantic pursuit, leaving the field open to the rare few who know that in silence power ripens. Consider how easily this engineering can be observed in daily life. The worker is told to sacrifice endlessly for the company, with the unspoken promise that desperation will one day be rewarded. It rarely is. The lover is told that endless devotion will secure love, when in reality it breeds contempt. The citizen is told to obey blindly in exchange for protection, when in truth obedience ensures he is the first to be exploited. In every sphere, desperation is packaged as virtue, and detachment is demonized as arrogance. But beneath this illusion lies the truth. Detachment threatens control. The detached man cannot be manipulated by promises of approval, stability, or speed. He stands outside the cage while others compete to decorate its bars. Machiavelli understood that power structures do not survive by strength alone, but by perception. If the majority can be made to believe desperation is noble, then the few who resist are painted as villains. The detached are called cold, ruthless, unfeeling, labels designed to shame them into conformity. Yet history proves the opposite. It is the detached who rule, and the desperate who are ruled. The mask of morality hides the machinery of manipulation, and those too naive to see it become sacrifices to its order. The rulers of Florence, the princes of Italy, the kings of Europe all knew this game. Keep the masses desperate, and they will never unite. Keep them hungry for approval, and they will never question the hand that withholds it. The most terrifying cost of this engineered desperation is not exploitation alone, but dependency that seeps so deeply men believe it is natural. They cannot imagine life without begging, without clinging, without proving themselves to others. They are not chained by iron, but by their own impulses. And so the cage is invisible, and invisible cages are the hardest to escape. The man who has been taught to believe his desperation is virtue will never try to detach, for he cannot imagine a world in which silence, restraint, and concealment are his greatest weapons. He believes desperation is survival, and in that belief, he hands over his sovereignty willingly. But if desperation is engineered so carefully, so ruthlessly, then the question grows sharper. What happens when this conditioning collides with ambition? What becomes of a man who believes he is destined for greatness, yet is chained by impulses planted in him since birth? It is here that desperation reveals its most destructive face, not merely as weakness, but as the silent executioner of potential itself. Ambition chained to desperation is the cruelest paradox of all, for nothing burns brighter than a man convinced he is destined to rise. Yet nothing burns out faster than a man who cannot detach from his hunger long enough to wield it wisely. The ambitious but desperate man believes his intensity is proof of strength, but to others it reeks of fragility. His desire is so visible, so uncontrollable, that even before he ascends, he announces the conditions of his downfall. He spends his energy chasing recognition instead of consolidating power, exposing his plans instead of concealing them, demanding respect instead of commanding it. In this way, desperation does not merely slow ambition, it strangles it, and in strangling it, it ensures the man who might have become formidable is remembered only as a cautionary tale. The first way desperation murders ambition is by robbing it of timing. True ambition requires patience, the ability to wait for conditions to ripen, to conceal until the strike is certain. The desperate man cannot wait. He rushes, he forces, he lunges at shadows. He believes movement is progress, when in truth, premature movement invites ruin. A general who marches too early into battle is slaughtered, no matter how brave his army. A ruler who reveals his designs before securing allies is overthrown, no matter how just his cause. A lover who declares too much before affection is solidified, is abandoned, no matter how genuine his devotion. The desperate man cannot master timing, and without timing, his ambition is as doomed as a soldier without a weapon. The second way desperation ruins ambition is through predictability. The ambitious man who cannot detach is easily read, for his desires dictate his moves. His rivals do not need spies. They only need to watch his impulses. His hunger reveals what he values, what he fears, what he will chase, what he will avoid. They need only dangle his ambition before him, and he will walk willingly into their traps. This is why Machiavelli warned that the strongest ambition is not the loudest, but the most silent. The man who reveals nothing cannot be predicted, but the man whose ambition radiates from every glance, every plea, every desperate gesture, is already defeated by those who can calculate calmly from the shadows. The third and most fatal way desperation kills ambition is by eroding dignity. Ambition without dignity inspires no loyalty, no respect, no fear. The desperate man sacrifices dignity for recognition, crawling where he should stand, pleading where he should command. He believes this proves humility. In truth, it proves weakness. No army follows a general who begs. No subjects respect a ruler who clings. No allies trust a man who grovels. Once dignity is lost, ambition is a corpse still moving, but without pulse, without life. The desperate man may continue to pursue power, but his very posture ensures he will never hold it, for others despise him even as they pretend to honor him. Look to history, and the corpses of such men litter the past. Consider the rulers who revealed their hunger for expansion too soon, provoking coalitions that crushed them before their strength had matured. Consider the ministers who begged for influence in courts, only to be discarded once their desperation was too obvious to ignore. Consider the countless lovers, generals, and princes who mistook their passion for proof of destiny, only to discover that unrestrained passion inspires neither loyalty nor fear. In each case, ambition was not destroyed by lack of opportunity, but by lack of detachment. They were doomed not by external forces, but by their own inability to govern themselves. This is the cruel truth. The man who cannot detach from his ambition will never realize it. His hunger becomes his leash, pulled by rivals, mocked by allies, pitied by followers, and yet the tragedy grows deeper. For desperation does not only ruin the ambitious man, it poisons those around him. His allies grow weary of his need. His rivals grow sharper by watching his mistakes. His followers grow restless under the weight of his insecurity. In this way, desperation spreads outward, turning not only the man but his entire circle into victims. Ambition, which should have elevated them all, becomes a curse that drags them down together. And so the question sharpens into something more terrifying. If desperation is capable of destroying ambition even in the strongest, even in those destined for greatness, what then becomes of the masses who live not with restrained ambition, but with frantic craving? What happens when entire populations are infected with desperation, when whole generations mistake hunger for strength and reveal their ambitions before they are ready? The answer is not merely failure, it is collapse. And the collapse of desperate societies is bloodier than the fall of desperate men, for it consumes not one destiny but millions. When desperation infects entire societies, collapse is no longer a possibility, it is an inevitability. For a desperate society devours itself from within, tearing apart the very structures it depends upon. Its leaders cling to popularity with trembling hands. Its workers beg for recognition rather than building strength. Its lovers chase endlessly and exhaust one another until families shatter. What once were the pillars of order, patience, restraint, concealment, are replaced with spectacle, exposure, and frantic pursuit. A desperate man can be destroyed by a rival, but a desperate society is destroyed by its own pulse, a fever of need that burns until nothing remains but ashes. History records this pattern with brutal consistency, yet men are too blind in their hunger to recognize it until the ruin is already upon them. The first symptom of a desperate society is volatility. Without detachment, markets rise and fall on rumor. Rulers shift with every wave of public emotion, and alliances fracture at the first hint of instability. No structure can endure because no one is willing to wait, to conceal, to restrain. Everyone reacts instantly, and reaction is the death of stability. A ruler who changes policy with every outcry is no ruler at all. An army that panics at the first setback is no army at all. A people who cannot detach from their own fears will consume themselves with them. Volatility breeds chaos, and chaos breeds vultures, those detached few who wait calmly above, descending only when the desperate masses have torn themselves open. The second symptom is exploitation on a grand scale. Just as the desperate man is used by those who can withhold, so too is the desperate society. Foreign powers manipulate its hunger, corporations profit from its cravings, demagogues rise by feeding its desperation while secretly despising it. Every weakness is amplified, every impulse monetized, every insecurity turned into a weapon against itself. The society believes it is thriving because its desires are constantly indulged, yet in truth, it is being drained of strength, sovereignty, and dignity. Just as the desperate lover mistakes cruelty for passion, the desperate society mistakes exploitation for prosperity. And by the time it realizes its error, its sovereignty has already been sold. The third symptom is decay of spirit. In a desperate society, men no longer see themselves as sovereign beings, but as creatures of endless need. They do not ask how to rule themselves. They ask only who will feed them, flatter them, approve of them. Their self-contempt grows, for deep within they know desperation is weakness, yet they are trapped in its cycle. They despise their leaders, yet demand their approval. They scorn their partners, yet cling to them in fear of solitude. They hate their labor, yet beg for its continuation. Desperation eats away not only at institutions but at the soul of a people, until even their laughter is tinged with self-loathing, their pleasures with shame, their victories with the hollow taste of dependency. History offers countless examples of such decay. Rome, when it lost the stoic detachment of its republic and descended into the desperate cries of bread and circuses, was already finished. The Byzantine emperors who clung too visibly to the throne while foreign armies gathered at their gates were doomed before the walls fell. Even Florence itself, when its citizens revealed their desperation for purity under Savonarola, marched willingly into tyranny and flames. In each case, the desperation of the many allowed the calm and calculating few to seize control. Desperate societies are not conquered, they collapse, and their ruins are collected by those who waited. This is the paradox Machiavelli understood. The more desperate a society becomes, the more it glorifies desperation. Its artists sing of passion without restraint, its leaders praise transparency, its philosophers preach sincerity as the highest virtue. Yet beneath these hymns lies the stench of rot. The very traits celebrated as strength are the marks of decay. Detachment, patience, concealment, all condemned as cruel or inhuman, are the only qualities that could preserve them. But the desperate masses, blind to this truth, attack the detached as villains, even as their world disintegrates under the weight of their own impulses. And so, the danger grows darker still. For if desperation can corrupt the soul of individuals and bring nations to ruin, then what is left when desperation becomes the ruling law of the modern age? What happens when speed, exposure, and hunger are not only tolerated but institutionalized? When desperation itself becomes the foundation of governance, commerce, and culture? The answer is not merely instability. It is transformation into something far more sinister, where men are not only desperate but proud of their chains, blind to the silent few who shape their fate from the shadows. When desperation becomes institutionalized, it ceases to look like weakness and begins to wear the mask of progress. Entire systems are built on feeding it, disguising enslavement as freedom, packaging chains as choices. The man who scrolls endlessly, seeking validation, believes he is connected. The worker who sacrifices his dignity for job security believes he is responsible. The ruler who trembles before the crowd, altering every word to please, believes he is democratic. Each of them confuses desperation for virtue because the structure around them demands it. What once was a private flaw is now a public law, and those who refuse to participate are branded as cold, arrogant, even dangerous. This is how institutionalized desperation maintains its grip, not by hiding itself, but by redefining itself as the new morality. The first mechanism of institutional desperation is surveillance disguised as transparency. Men are told that exposing their every thought, their every desire, their every ambition is honesty. But in reality, it is control. The man who cannot detach from visibility is enslaved by it. He edits himself constantly, desperate for approval, terrified of silence. His life becomes a stage where applause is survival and disapproval is death. The powerful need not chain such men, they chain themselves. The illusion of freedom in transparency blinds them to the truth. They are prisoners of their own exposure. A detached man, unreadable and unseen, is feared. But a desperate man who publishes his soul daily is not feared, he is farmed. The second mechanism is economic exploitation masked as opportunity. Societies of desperation promise endless chances for advancement, endless paths to prosperity, but every path is built on need. The desperate worker takes loans to sustain an image, binds himself to contracts he cannot escape, sacrifices his health for wages that vanish in an instant. He is told his desperation proves ambition, that his endless sacrifice is noble, yet behind the curtain, his need is calculated, harvested, and sold. The economy does not thrive on the strength of detached men, it thrives on the addiction of desperate ones. And so the cycle is perpetuated. Hunger is rewarded with scraps, scraps deepen hunger, and the system continues to feed on those who cannot escape. The third mechanism is political manipulation disguised as participation. Citizens are told their voices matter, that their cries of need shape the future. But rulers, trained in detachment, listen only to exploit. Every desperate plea is catalogued, every fear amplified, every craving weaponized into policy that deepens dependency. The desperate citizen believes he is included, when in truth he is managed. His emotions are measured, his impulses anticipated, his obedience purchased with illusions. He cannot detach long enough to see that sovereignty is not given, it is taken, and so he applauds while the ground beneath him erodes, certain that his desperation is democracy, blind to the strings guiding his every move. These mechanisms combine to form something more insidious than corruption. They create a culture where desperation is not only common, but celebrated, where men compete not for strength but for exposure, not for patience but for reaction, not for sovereignty but for dependence. The detached man is now the enemy of such a system, for he cannot be controlled by applause, by loans, by politics. He withdraws, he conceals, he refuses to be predictable. His silence terrifies a desperate society more than chaos itself, for it reminds them of what they have lost. They call him ruthless, cold, unfeeling. Yet in truth, he is the only one left unbroken. But this raises the most terrifying question yet. What happens when the detached few, those rare predators who stand above the desperate herd, decide not merely to survive but to rule? For in a world engineered to reward hunger, the man who resists hunger wields power far greater than kings of the past. His silence becomes more valuable than armies, his patience more destructive than war. And if desperation has become the law of the masses, then those who master detachment are no longer men, they are gods in the eyes of those too desperate to imagine freedom. When the detached few rise above a desperate age, they no longer compete on equal ground. They do not chase, they do not beg, they do not reveal, and so their every move becomes amplified. For against the noise of desperation, silence resounds like thunder. A single withheld word sparks speculation. A single refusal breeds fear. A single pause shifts the weight of entire nations. The desperate masses, trained to scream their needs into the void, cannot comprehend the man who withholds. They call him cruel, manipulative, heartless. But secretly, they tremble, because his restraint is the one power they cannot imitate. In a world that confuses hunger for strength, detachment becomes the most terrifying weapon of all. The first weapon of the detached is unpredictability. While desperation makes a man's every move obvious, detachment conceals intentions until the moment of execution. The detached ruler does not reveal his ambitions until they are already secured, and so rivals can never stop him. The detached lover does not chase, and so desire pursues him instead. The detached worker does not beg, and so employers, unsure of his loyalty, offer more to secure him. In every field, unpredictability creates leverage, because fear of the unknown is stronger than the contempt of the known. Machiavelli observed that men fear what they cannot read, and detachment renders a man unreadable. The second weapon is control. Detachment grants mastery not only over perception but over the self. The detached man is not enslaved by impulses, not driven by every slight, not broken by every denial. His restraint makes him immovable, while the desperate are blown like leaves by every gust of emotion. He commands respect not by demanding it, but by showing he does not need it. To rulers, this is sovereignty. To rivals, it is terror. To followers, it is awe. Control separates the sovereign from the slave, the predator from the prey. The desperate cannot control themselves, so they are controlled. The detached can control themselves, so they control others. The third weapon is scarcity. In an age of endless exposure, detachment makes a man rare, and rarity makes him valuable. The desperate flood the world with their hunger, their confessions, their constant presence. They exhaust others by their abundance. The detached withdraws, reveals little, appears sparingly, and each appearance is magnified. His absence builds intrigue, his silence builds power, his rare words become commandments. Men chase what they cannot easily have. They devalue what is always available. Detachment transforms a man into a scarce resource, and scarcity is the foundation of influence. But these weapons are not merely defensive. They allow the detached to command the desperate, to bend entire societies to their will. For when desperation becomes the universal condition, detachment becomes divine. The desperate seek gods to worship, masters to follow, rulers to obey, and they find them in those rare few who can resist what they cannot. It is not armies or wealth that elevate such men, but discipline. Their power lies in restraint, and restraint in a desperate world is indistinguishable from magic. They do not need to chase influence. Influence chases them. They do not need to beg for loyalty. Loyalty clings to them out of fear and fascination. And yet, this revelation carries its own shadow. For if detachment is the supreme weapon, then desperation is the supreme vulnerability, and most men, unwilling or unable to master themselves, will forever live as prey. This is the tragic rhythm of history. The few rule because the many cannot. And as long as desperation consumes the masses, the detached will stand above them, not as equals, but as sovereigns. The game is cruel, but it is unchanging. The desperate fall, the detached endure. The question that remains is not whether this truth will persist, it always has, but what it demands of you. For if desperation is rising, if detachment is vanishing, then the choice is stark, to rule as one of the few, or to be devoured as one of the many. You have reached the final step in this descent, the place where the truth can no longer be softened. Desperation is death, and detachment is life. Every ruin you have seen, every humiliation described, every trap exposed, they all reduce to this single law. The man who cannot detach will be stripped, exploited, broken, forgotten. The man who masters detachment will be feared, respected, obeyed, even worshipped. It is not kindness that preserves him, not honesty, not sincerity, but his ability to govern himself when others are governed by their hunger. In a desperate age, sovereignty belongs to those who need nothing, and slavery belongs to those who need everything. This is the cruel order of the world, and it has never changed. Look closely at the desperate man, and you will see chains he forged with his own hands. His every plea, every confession, every trembling pursuit became a link in the chain. He thought he was proving love, he was proving weakness. He thought he was proving loyalty, he was proving dependence. He thought he was proving ambition, he was proving predictability. In his own desperation, he signed away the rights to his life, until nothing remained of him but a hollow figure waiting to be managed, used, and discarded. He is not destroyed by accident, he is destroyed by design, his own design, and the designs of those who saw his hunger and turned it into a weapon against him. Now look at the detached man. He is no louder, no stronger, no more gifted in appearance than the rest. His difference is discipline. Where others beg, he waits. Where others reveal, he conceals. Where others chase, he withdraws. Where others tremble, he stands unmoved. This creates an aura that even his enemies cannot explain. They fear him, not because he threatens openly, but because they cannot calculate him. They respect him, not because he demands it, but because he withholds it. They follow him, not because he chases them, but because they cannot escape the pull of his restraint. His silence is heavier than their noise, his patience sharper than their haste, his detachment stronger than their desperation, and so he rules. The rise of desperation in this age does not make detachment obsolete, it makes it priceless. In a world where men confess their souls to strangers and beg for approval from shadows, the man who can remain still becomes untouchable. He does not reveal, he does not chase, he does not kneel, and because of this he becomes the one figure others orbit, the one whose value multiplies precisely because he withholds. Desperation may be common, but power never is. The detached man is the rarest of all resources, and rarity is the currency of domination. The world cannot resist him, because the world does not understand him. They only know that in his silence lies something they cannot break. This is why detachment has always been the supreme shield of power, and why its disappearance marks the decline of men. For once detachment vanishes, men become predictable, controllable, disposable. Their enemies need not conquer them, they conquer themselves. Their lovers need not leave them, they humiliate themselves. Their rulers need not betray them, they reveal their weakness and invite betrayal. The desperate man writes his own execution, but the detached man writes his own sovereignty. To live without detachment is to live as prey. To master detachment is to live as predator. There is no middle ground. And now, the cliff opens before you, for you must ask yourself which law you will embody. Will you be the desperate one, whose hunger is a leash, whose need is a cage, whose life is dictated by the approval of others? Or will you be the detached one, who governs himself so completely that others cannot help but submit? This is the final secret Machiavelli left between the lines. The truth rulers lived and subjects never understood. The game is not about who desires most, but who can need least. And if you cannot need least, you will be devoured. If you can, you will stand above the desperate masses, untouchable, feared, obeyed. The choice is before you. And so the question is not whether detachment is disappearing, the question is whether you will disappear with it or rise in silence as one of the few who endure. If you've made it this far, it's because a part of you already knows this truth. Desperation is the leash that binds most men, and detachment is the blade that cuts it. The masses will beg, chase, reveal, and be devoured. But you, if you can withhold, if you can wait, if you can govern yourself, will be untouchable. Now tell me in the comments, are you ready to suffer the silence that terrifies others? Are you willing to trade hunger for restraint, exposure for mystery, desperation for sovereignty? If this message touched you, if it made sense, write in the comments, I choose detachment. Let's see how many here are truly ready to stand apart in a desperate age. And don't forget, keep watching the next video. It's important, much more than you imagine. See you there.